clock is ticking. All right. So thank you so much for having us, first of all, and allowing us this time to share our story of what this is like on the ground. And I'm really thrilled and honored to be here to share our story with you today. I handed out some materials, and I just want to give you a really quick overview because I'll be referencing some of them throughout. So one, we've already mentioned our community assessment project, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but you have our summary report. And a lot of what I'll talk about in the next few minutes is how we moved from quantitative data, which is really important, to being able to tell the story, put meat on the bones of that data, the human meat. What does that story really look like behind those numbers in our community? And that's really what this serves to start to do. So please take a look at that. I have sample full community assessment project reports. I've got a few up front, so over lunch if you want to flip through those, please feel free to come grab one. We also have our, that's fine. We also have our summary of our Youth Violence Prevention Strategic Plan, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, as well as the executive summary of our data report, which informed that plan. And we wanted to make sure those were accessible to you. So you saw what tools we were using to engage the community. So I'm the Director of Community Organizing at the United Way of Santa Cruz County and have the honor and privilege of working with so many in our community that are committed to creating change on the ground in the name of dignity, equity, and justice so that everyone in our community can thrive. And about 3 years ago, our community came together after a few critical incidents around youth violence and said, what are we doing about this together, differently, using the latest that we know we need to be? We had a lot of disparate efforts, a lot of amazing efforts, but they weren't connected. They weren't under one common plan or goal. So we knew we needed to do that. We knew the timing was right, and we wanted to do things differently. So that's what moved us to create a community assessment project. Or to create the community assessment of youth violence prevention using our community assessment project for many of the indicators. So we collected about 60 different indicators in our youth violence report, and then used that to inform a planning process over the last year and a half. So our mission statement that came out of a collective community process really reflects some of the core values that we've used to drive this process, so I wanted to point some of those out, because a lot of them have been talked about today. One is taking a public health approach to addressing violence. We knew we needed to look at those social determinants of youth violence and of health in our community. What are the social and economic factors driving violence in our community? We wanted to make sure we were using balanced strategies, so not just looking at suppression, not just looking at prevention, but everything in between. We wanted to make sure that we used data from multiple sources. So we knew that the core secondary data that we have access to is important. We also knew that that didn't include all of the voices that needed to be represented and all of the stories behind those trends. So we went out and collected a lot of qualitative information as well, which I'll talk about. We focused on demonstrating, understanding, and addressing disparities and inequities that showed up in the data. And then making sure that after we engaged the community around those and we had a good grasp of them, that we reflected those in the strategies that we chose to push forward. And we focused lastly on authentic community engagement, making sure that we went out to the sectors that are, particularly including youth and families that are often underrepresented in these efforts, and making sure they were telling us from their perspective what the data meant to them, how they were represented in it, if they were, and what it really needed to look like to turn the curve on youth violence from their perspective. So really quickly, again, we started with our community assessment. We developed the strategic plan, and we launched that strategic plan just in May. And we're very excited to report to you throughout this presentation a few areas that are already in motion. Like Julie said, we can't just be an assessment. So we were an assessment and an action from day one. I want to thank a few of our key partners before I go any further. We worked very closely with Applied Survey Research, which is locally based but nationally and internationally known for their work on the ground with communities to apply research and surveys to create community change. And we've worked very closely with the Lucille and David Packard Foundation, with our local Chiefs Association, Probation, and hundreds of folks that gave in-kind time to this project. So we want to thank them. We knew in order to bring that many different partners together, some who hadn't worked together on this issue, but some who actually had adversarial relationships regarding youth violence, different ideas on what gangs mean, different ideas on what public safety even is, and had really burnt some bridges there, and we had to start rebuilding those. In order to do that, we needed a framework. We needed something that we could turn to that would bring us all together. For the first time, to truly look at what could be our North Star, what could be that thing that brings us to our goal together. And that's where we started with what we keep hearing today, which is purpose first. We wanted to see what we all could agree on, which is our purpose, the result that we wanted to achieve. So results-based accountability really became our framework. It starts with identifying the population, which was youth 10 to 24 for us. And then the results, the set of results that we wanted to see in our community. We envisioned what those were. We got down to brass tacks. What does that really look like? And then we looked at our data. Then we looked at the indicators that were speaking to us about those results. And we looked at a broad swath of data. Again, 60 indicators. So not just arrest rates, not just probation rates, but all of those other things that are related to youth violence that I'll talk more about. We also, as I mentioned before, wanted to put meat on the bones of our data. So the data was really interesting to some people. Let me say, community engagement with data can be tricky. People sort of gloss over when you start throwing numbers at them, and you really need to tell the story of what it means. What does it mean to them? Why should they care? Why does it matter? So we also looked at the story behind the trend. So if a trend is going up or down, if graduation rates are going down for a certain population in our community, that's information, but what do we do with that? Why is that? What's the cause? What's the root cause? What are people's experiences, lived experiences of that? And that's what we worked really hard to get behind. We then built key partnerships based on what we knew we needed to shift, and then, again, developed our strategies as actually the last step. We decided what we wanted to do last because we wanted people to come in the room and let go of their pet projects, let go of their programs, let go of what they thought worked, and let's get down to what the numbers say, what our community's telling us, and then build something together. So that really did reduce a lot of the barriers between groups and bring people to the table who we never thought we would even get at the table, and they stayed. So we broke it down into 3 focus areas: families, neighborhoods, and youth in schools. And so under all 3 of those areas fell all of the indicators that we used to measure our results and that we set to measure our evaluation moving forward. So what we're here today, I could talk forever, probably all day, about our process, but what we're here today to talk about is our data collection and how we measured all of this and how we use data on the ground. So we, again, used an array of data sources. We used many sources to guide the plan, including secondary sources from national and state level, local data, qualitative information we gathered from focus groups and one-on-one interviews. Some examples of the data sources we used: one was the California Healthy Kids Survey. It's a voluntary survey in all of our school districts. The American Community Survey, California Department of Justice, Department of Education, Child Welfare Services reports. Then we even had Youth City Council do a peer-to-peer survey in our community. We had Probation Department, Gang Task Force be very transparent and give us data that we hadn't ever accessed before. And of course, we used our community assessment project. We so appreciate our 21-year partnership with Dignity Health to produce the community assessment project, and it's been an invaluable tool in our community. And to produce, and I'll talk about this a little more, to produce data and information that matters, and to make it be able to matter to our community. So for this project, following results-based accountability and what good data means to a community, we knew we needed to choose indicators that were going to be measured over time so they could give us trend data so that we knew in the future that would still be there and we could measure our progress. We knew we needed to collect data and use indicators that had communication power, that people could connect to, that they understood. And then we needed, we're sort of reinventing or looking at new and innovative ways of measuring social determinants and some of these softer factors around youth violence. So there aren't any measures for it. So like Julie said, at the county level, there may be measures, but what does that mean for our neighborhoods? One example is neighborhood connectivity and social capital. We knew that was important to public safety at the neighborhood level. How the heck do you measure that? So we looked for proxy measures that we had access to, and the Community Assessment Project gave us that. So survey every other year is done in our community of 700 residents, statistically significant, and it gives us information about what their view of their quality of life is. So one of the proxy measures we used for social connectivity and social capital is how much people feel they can go to their neighbor for help. And that's a question in our survey. So that was one proxy measure we used for one of those softer indicators we knew were important and we didn't want to let go of, but we weren't quite sure how to deal with yet. And we look to all of you to develop those indicators moving forward. Right. So the qualitative information, the meat on the bones, we wanted to make sure we had authentic community inclusion, something like the California Healthy Kids Survey, for example. Our school districts do it, but only in traditional schools. This is the first year, because of this planning process, that they started doing it in alternative education schools to get those youth that we're actually talking the most about to actually be represented in the data. So that was a big shift for our community, and we're really excited to see what that first year data says. But because we didn't have that, and we knew this data didn't include them, we went to them. We started to do focus groups and asked them, so we made sure their voice was included. It's the qualitative process, it's that meat on the bones, the story behind the trend, where our disparities really came to life. Yes, they were there in the initial data, but we didn't know what it meant to us. We didn't know what to do with it necessarily. We wanted to make sure that we were creating a plan that was responsive to what was happening in our community. So we made sure that those qualitative processes informed what we were seeing in the data, checked it, rechecked it, and then really learned what strategies we needed to do and to put forward to deal with that. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. In the next few slides, I'm going to demonstrate some of the quantitative data that we gathered, and then how we filled in with qualitative information, and then how that informed our strategies. So safety at school, obviously an important indicator when you're talking about youth violence. This is something that we measured through the California Healthy Kids Survey. It's self-reported data on how safe our youth feel in schools. On the surface level, there's already a disparity across our county. Students in Pajaro Valley and the San Lorenzo Valley feel less safe in their schools than other students do across our county. And that tells part of the story. When we dove deeper, we looked at particularly Pajaro Valley Unified School District. That's an area that's 88% Latino. It faces the highest challenges in a lot of our social and economic factors in the community. And so one insight that came through the qualitative information we gathered was a big aha for us. One of our alternative education teachers from that area said, you know, one of the biggest factors for my students on whether they are going to be gang involved is whether they have a safe transportation to school. They get tapped on their way to school if they have to walk to join a gang, and they get tapped to get involved in activities. So that was a big aha. That's something that we can tangibly do. So we've created a Safe Havens program, and we're starting to transform the conversation around safe routes to schools, talking about helmets and crosswalks and things like that, but expanding that version of what's safety, what does safe route to school really mean, and making sure that they have other means and that those other considerations are there. So equity was always important, but not always front and center of this process when we started. But as the data started to show, both quantitative and qualitative, that there were very clear disparities, the conversations at our work group started to shift, and equity and disparities became central. It became a driving force of why people wanted to be at the table and to do this work. It showed clear disparities across various systems, and have led to a myriad of different specific strategies to deal with them. One is the first ever collaborative initiative for our community in partnership with the Hayward Burns Institute to look at disparities in our education and justice system, to really drill down into the data in those systems. Things like insights like underutilizing pro-social activities for youth wasn't just because there weren't enough. Sometimes there were plenty and they were the right activities, but youth didn't have access to them. Too expensive, not the right transportation, not the right location or time. So access equity became a big aha for us and something that we could tangibly do something about. One example in our community, oh boy, that I'll hurry.
You can take a few more minutes.
Okay. One example I just wanted to highlight in our community around, somebody mentioned earlier that it takes some courage to get transparent data from stakeholders sometimes, and then to own what that data shows, and the equities or inequities that can come to when they give the community that data. So our probation department has always held the line of really paving the way for others to do the same and being very transparent with their data. So they've been working with the Hayward Burns Institute to look at their direct file or trying youth as adults data. And our data shows that 88% of our youth that are tried as adults in our community are Latino. There's a huge disparity. There's a lot of easy explanations and answers for that if you don't want to own that, so we dug deeper. And then digging a little deeper, we saw that those youth who have similar charges, similar arrests, similar charges, who are white and Latino, still the Latino are more often tried as an adult. So we were able to then start to advocate for change around that because of looking at that data a little deeper in those partnerships. So those partnerships are key, and working with your stakeholders to give you that data is key. So just a couple more things. With gangs, just presenting the slide because it was data that was new that we could get from our partners because we built trust, but having law enforcement at the table and be able to understand this from a data perspective was a huge door opening for us. They weren't used to coming to collaborative tables, didn't want to sit at meetings. So we had a champion really come out of this, a lieutenant in one of our police departments, and say, I want to do this. I see the value of it. Now I have a common language. I have a common language of data to talk to other partners about, so we don't have to get into the nitpickiness of definitions and stuff yet. And then I can talk to my other colleagues in my police department, and they can now see the value of this collaborative work. So it really gave him a story to tell and something to stand on. And from that trust, then we built the relationships to be able to have lots of multiple truths in a room and different perspectives and different definitions and to work through that together. High school graduation, just a quick story from our community. Again, surface level, there's obvious disparities. What do they mean? So one of our director of student services in the most impacted school district with this took this on and became a data champion, really, and started to dig deeper into what we know one underlying factor is with high school graduation, which is school disciplinary policies. And through shifting policy based on the data she dove into, she was able to reduce suspensions by 60% and expulsions by 40% in 1 year. So this is a huge shift in a policy based on data that she found through this process. Youth employment, again, on the surface, it looks like we need more jobs. It's reduced by 20% in the past few years. We know that it's a protective factor and that it's a huge asset to youth moving forward. But under the surface, youth were telling us it's not just that there's a lack of jobs, it's that employers don't want us because of the way we look or the way we talk or the way we dress. And so we needed to engage employers differently, and we needed to engage youth to be good employees and to make sure that those jobs that did exist were accessible to the youth who wanted them. So again, more story behind that initial look at the data really gave us a direction to go in. So this, just 2 more slides. This was not without challenges. And so some of the challenges that we came across were that it was hard sometimes to find accurate, objective data that was up to date. Some of the sources, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is notoriously late on their data, for example. Truancy in school disciplinary data was all over the map. You go to one district and they measure it one way. Somebody has a different opinion of what those things are and how they should be measured in different systems. We couldn't compare different districts at all. And so one of the recommendations and strategies is to fix that and to start working with the districts to create systems of measurement that can be used across. We wanted to do a deeper level of analysis, often get into geography, get into more of the racial and ethnic disparities, but we didn't have the resources. Getting to that level of data is expensive, and we're a small community, and we started this with the dream and the knowledge that we needed, the vision that we needed to do this together, without the resources to do it, which is how so many of our initiatives start, because we're committed to that end goal. So we took that risk. Some of the self-reported data sources can obviously be an issue. Again, they don't always represent everyone, but this was in fact the first year that our peer-to-peer youth survey got resources and included alt-ed and non-traditional schools as well. So they got engaged through this process, through looking at the data. They were so excited about it that they've surveyed thousands of youth in our community, something they've done voluntarily that in the past has cost us multiple tens of thousands of dollars to do. Sometimes stakeholders didn't know about pertinent data sources, even if it's in their field. They don't know it's there, and it could be informing their decisions and their policy making and all of that, and they didn't even know it was there. We had a superintendent that didn't know the California Healthy Kids Survey existed in her school district. Now she does. And we're proud to be able to engage people in that way and reduce some of those barriers. And lastly, and a big aha for us, some stakeholders look at the data and still deny there's a problem. They say, oh, and turn a blind eye. We had one presentation to a board of education, and they said, well, we don't have these problems here. They actually have the most problems there. And so telling the story behind the data, not just the numbers and the sources of the data, and really making sure that it's reputable data became very important. Lastly, we're moving into implementation. We can't look away because now we know. And many partners are with us. They can't look away because now they know. So they're on board, and the data help drive that. It's undeniable some of the issues that our community is facing, and it's undeniable what the strengths are in our community that we can build on. So we're engaging the community in implementation. We just launched the plan in May, and we're already seeking resources to set in motion a prioritized set of strategies at the community level. So not at the county level at which this plan was created, but now looking at each jurisdiction, each neighborhood, and what do they want to do. We believe everyone has a contribution to make in implementing this plan. And then we're seeking resources to deepen our data analysis of the disparities and the geographies and some of those things, really making sure that we dive deeper into the data so that when we create our list of measurements for evaluation, that we're not just using those larger level indicators, that they're really drilled down so that we can see progress at the incremental level. And lastly, we're seeking resources to ensure that we can thoroughly evaluate our process. Why is there so much seeking resources in this? Because again, this costs money. This takes finances and resources, and communities all across the US probably are wanting to do this work, but it really is a challenge to find ways to make that happen and to piece together local resources with larger resources that can truly support what's possible with this work. So again, we all came together because we shared a commitment that started with a set of results, a set of data, that really started with our purpose. So we started with a purpose, then a set of data that drove our results, and now we can't stop because we've all seen what's there, and we're ready to move from planning to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. I know you must have 100 questions, but we'll hold those until after we've heard from Michael.